Metal Gear Solid 2 is a time-space continuum of gameplay. If action and stealth are divided by space, they are united in time. Substance is a timing-based game. The fundamental stealth mechanics involve maneuvering around the big shell and taking advantage of the small spaces absent of your adversary's senses to reach your next objective. The action mechanics, here being the ability to attack the enemy from first person generally, are the means of the player to disrupt the timing of the enemy in order to pass through the resulting created space. When the options are many, the answers are few. When the options are few, the answers are many. Metal Gear Solid 2 distills stealth action down to a short formula, with only 3 variables: moving, grappling, and aiming. The interplay of these means there are far more viable approaches to a given map segment than you would think, but never to the degree that the player outmatches the enemy. The form for which you achieve your objective within the scoring system is always stealth. And action supplements this. It does not come out to stealth action or action stealth combination gameplay, blue and red, but we could say it is rather a lavender made from the two of them. This is the core, elemental stealth of Metal Gear Solid as a series, game-like stealth, where the 5 series, for comparison, has a more simulationist approach. In my evaluation of this design, it has been my mistake in previous reviews to say that aiming is not a stance. Aiming is a stance. It has just variously been a moving and non-moving stance in the already reviewed games. And because it had not been demonstrated to me by Metal Gear Solid 2's example that aiming could be so well weaved into the fabric of the game as to be considered a stance, I did not see it as such. In MGS2 then, Raiden and Snake have 2 speeds, walking and running, 2 traversal stances, standing and crawling, 2 static stances, crouching and aiming, 2 contextual stances, pressed and hanging, and 1 additional special movement, which is cartwheeling, and 1 additional item movement with the box. So we have 6 stances, 2 speeds, 1 special, and 1 item as our basic tool set. 10 mechanics is a very small tool set, but because each is constructed as a method towards a solution rather than an answer in itself, MGS2 emerges with 2 very defined but complementary approaches to its time-space continuum: macro-positional stealth and micro-positional action. Your location within the map, in the level, at a given time, that is, Raiden's coordinates within the space-time continuum of gameplay, are the formula by which the player remains hidden or is detected. Stealth is the successful traversal through whatever the state of space-time is in a given instance, and action disrupts either space or time to ensure continuous stealth. It is not, on its own, a means to the objective, like in Phantom Pain or even Peace Walker, where it is viable but discouraged by score. Here, at the maximum proper difficulty, any implementation of action induces failure both in score and survival. The immediate objection to this analytical position is that MGS3 is also macro-positional like MGS2, because changing your stance to prone is also changing your coordinates in the space-time continuum of gameplay. This is illogical, and the refutation is that in MGS3, changing your stance is not a macro-positional change. In MGS3, the rule in wilderness spacetime is that there are spaces where you would be detected while standing, but not while prone, given proper camouflage. This is a micro-positional principle, and MGS2 does not operate on such principles. There is no situation where you can go prone in a bush out in the middle of enemy sense boxes, or put on the spider camo and run straight through a group of enemies, or through the entire level without care for the enemy scent zones and their patrol routines, which generate the space-time continuum gameplay to begin with. Generally, the only spaces which are completely immune to enemy senses are in the exits and entrances to levels, and even locations which are safe can only be reached by proper macro positioning, not micro positional changes. Thus, it is so that MGS2 is macro positional as a rule, and micro positional as an exception to that rule, wherein MGS3 the rule is both macro positional and micro positional. And for other games, the playing field is even more indistinguishable. First-person aiming is the most direct application of the action mechanics, unlike knocking, CQC, grappling, and so on. It is important that the first-person aiming prevents the player from moving. In order to create the interplay of macro stealth and micro action, the position of the player in the level, in space-time, must be sacrificed to acquire a proper shooting position on the enemy. That is, to create space, one must give up time, and to acquire time, one must give up space. How do we demonstrate this? The most frustrating yet illuminating place where this dichotomy occurs is in the sediment pool. Why is this? It is because the sediment pool is a panopticon. The times at which some spot on the map is not being observed by some enemy is very low, and so the space-time continuum is practically as strict as it gets. One can either take a perfect path with no errors, that is, moving through a given part of this space in the exact amount of time required during the time it is required to do so, as moving to a location too fast or too early can also get you caught, or one can sacrifice that short amount of time they have to not be detected upon entering the map to aim and tranquilize one or more enemies, thereby creating more space within the map. That is, sacrifice time to create space. Where does grappling factor in, and how is it different from aiming and moving? Grappling restricts your ability to move only partially, and thus does not have as great an effect on the gameplay continuum as aiming does, because aiming entirely restricts your ability to move. That is, it sacrifices the maximum amount of space to create the maximum amount of time. Grappling is in the minority in terms of how often an approach is applied, and often results in the player going to aim regardless, since to knock out an enemy from a grapple, the fastest way is to grapple them and then aim and strike their testicles. Alternatively, you can simply hold him till he passes out, and for this reason I would tend to separate grappling from other forms of attacking, since it doesn't involve any first-person aiming mechanic by default. It is a worthy mention since it is still an effective approach in many cases, but not often a first option. Movement of these already mentioned mechanics, when applied properly and purely, does not technically modify the space-time continuum, but uses the space present to achieve the objective in the minimum time possible. Gaining time from space using movement is actually a gain of negative time per the scoring, as moving anywhere perfectly would do so in the most time-efficient manner. Nonetheless, because of the application of movement within the space-time or time-space, gameplay continuum modifies foremost the player's completion time, the statement still holds. And likewise, the action supplements this to create space to move within. Therefore, action, by sacrificing the time during which an unobserved space is usable, changes the flow of gameplay space-time in order to achieve that original goal. Sacrifice time to modify space, sacrifice space to modify time. It is just as much a stealth action flow as a space-time continuum. The final variable in the space-time gameplay continuum is the type of map or level that the player has to cross. The tanker alternates generally between tight hallways and large open spaces, the outside of which Snake is meant to cross. On the Big Shell, Raiden has to defeat alternating open air segments with lots of viewing angles and a lower patrol count, though that number is supplanted often with flying ciphers, and indoor segments that mix the use of obstructions and corridors and corners, as well as the absence of both. Because of how the space-time gameplay works, this means that every room has its very own gameplay identity. Each one plays differently due to the uniqueness of the approaches required for all of them. But not only do the more apparent methods of completion, the passages through space-time, contribute to the identity, but the permutations add to them as well. In a bloated adventure-style game, there is only one solution to every problem, one key for every lock, and for the action stealth entry, the Phantom Pain, there is such a great number of solutions combined with the over-effectiveness of a select few approaches. The levels and loadouts have very little distinct identities in gameplay. Even MGS3 with its macro and micro positional stealth doesn't have this effect, most of all because of all the micro positional emphasis of the camo system, which makes the game often too lenient with the player's coordinates in space-time. And keep in mind, these are not comparisons per se, but refutations of alternative positions. The box in MGS2 is properly adapted and balanced into the space-time of the levels, with their often waist-high obstructions and the fact that it's the only way to stand still in the open, to complement the layout and design of the game. That is, what is in the game is actually integrated into it. The necessity of acknowledging the time-space continuum and the stealth action formula can only be enforced by difficulty. I had played this game before, but when I did, only hard difficulty was available, so obviously I picked that. I certainly kept game over if detected on, so it wasn't totally easy, but European Extreme is a whole different ballgame. No Metal Gear is even close to as hard as MGS2 is, neither in stealth nor in the action boss segments, and it is because MGS2 offers no quarter, allows no mistakes, permits no error, that this fundamental design principle emerges in the practice of gameplay. As I said in my very first Metal Gear Solid review, difficulty cleanses activity. Easier modes allow too much freedom for the player to do random crap that doesn't matter, to essentially avoid completing the game as it actually is. Metal Gear Solid 2 is insanely difficult to its merit, and additionally, I would say more difficult in the levels than in the bosses. Most of my continues were not in the bosses, but stubbornly attempting to pass a map segment, often suboptimally. To mention the sediment pool again, I'm sure at least 10% of my continues were just this little guy, this one little map segment. And at least 30% were just from defusing bombs in the first act. Difficulty cleanses activity, but this does not necessarily mean that it only removes applications of a tool. It can also add them. When playing for Big Boss, you're expected to beat the game without radar. You're expected to not need it, either due to memory of enemy patrols or familiarity with the mechanics of the game. This requirement, however, actually adds an application for leaning. Normally, there's no need to lean as long as you have radar, since the Soliton lets you see around corners, and the only application for leaning is shooting. But if you want to observe a modified patrol timing, or a full room, that is, any space-time which you have changed via your use of action, the only way is to press up against a wall and check. Therefore, when difficulty cleanses design, that challenge both removes pointless gameplay segments and restores unappreciated ones from degenerative forms to true integrity. The scoring reflects this, as it expects you to beat the game in less than 3 hours, under a certain number of shots, very little damage, and less than 10 saves. The scoring requires the player to learn an effective method of stealth to defeat the space-time layout of the game before he chooses to influence it with action. The player is called to know his fundamentals first and action as an advanced tool set. In easy modes, it's the reverse, and the sign of imbalance is the fact that you can trank anyone you want from anywhere at any time. That is not going to happen on European Extreme, where enemies basically snap to look at you the moment you enter a room. Metal Gear Solid 2 would not be experienced on an easy difficulty at all, and if anything, the easy difficulties could have been removed. The game also controls well. Can you imagine the misadventure of a difficult game with bad controls? My only objection is that turning is still wide instead of straight. They're doing this bad decision turn design with the D-pad even here, which makes me think that there's some intention behind it that I'm missing. According to my analysis, all I can surmise is that it's bad design. There's no purpose preventing the player from moving in a straight line, since never is there any section in this game in which moving in a straight line back and forth would somehow create a gameplay imbalance. Anything else about this game on a technical level is excellent, and to a greater degree than other games in the franchise. It runs at a very smooth 60 FPS, the controls are snappy, there's no delays or mitigation of player input, there's no interference on the developer's part with the player's expression of skill. There is one critical flaw, which is just something you get used to, even if it's terrible: the look acceleration during first-person aiming. I would argue, first and foremost, that it is not necessary to have look acceleration, because all it does is prevent the player in having confidence in their aim at any given time and prevent consistency in aiming. However, there is the argument that because it prevents the player from being consistent in shooting moving targets and emphasizes orientation before aiming, that there is an argument for its implementation. However, that argument is less sound than simply not having it. The biggest issue that can be seen immediately with no analysis of the levels is how extraneous many of the items are. You'll pretty much never use your grenade launcher, your rifle, medicine, bandages, diazepam, yes, you use it for sniping. Thermal goggles, you only use that for sniping. Mine detector, cigarettes, all of these are just useless bloat that doesn't really do anything. The items that do things enable bad mechanical design, like the diazepam. Sniping does not need to be a little DDR tap dance with your finger. Fighting the scope shake to be able to play the game is not necessary. There is no mentally sound argument you could make for this. And neither does this mechanic need to be enabled by an expendable resource. I hate to say it, but if this mechanic is to be implemented, it does not need to be enabled or controlled by an expendable resource like some adventure game. I hate to say it, but the common first-person shooter mechanic of focus or holding your breath is a better solution to resolving the effectiveness of a sniping weapon. Now, as I said, I am not here to say what this game should have been, but only what it is and whether it is good or bad. And regardless of what sniping in this game should have been, what it is not good. Additionally, there were many points in the game at which the beam from your laser aiming attachment was not visible in the sunlight on the big shell. Snake sneezing after being in the rain for more than 3 seconds is silly. That's not real difficulty, since it's, as far as I know, not quite avoidable. My final problem is that the HF blade cannot make a non-lethal thrusting motion. I assumed that because I had turned the blade to the blunt side that all my attacks were non-lethal. Apparently, thrusts are lethal no matter what, and yes, I should have known that given the blood. I should have reset, but in that case, why are they in the game if score would prevent you from using them at all? Other things that are extraneous because score prevents them is the neck break. Why is that in there? It doesn't make sense that lethal moves and purely lethal options like this are being retained in the game when they have no other options except killing. Unlike some lethal weapons like the USP, the AK, which can be used to destroy ciphers and security cameras, breaking necks does not have a secondary use case, and neither does the lethal thrust from the HF blade. I'm especially irked about the HF blade thing because that's where my 23 kills came from in my ending score. Speaking of my ending score, yeah, there it is. Like I said, it is a tough game, but that's why it's good, and that's partially why I enjoyed it. The game begins with Snake on a tanker in New York, outside on the stern in the rain. Immediately move along the left diagonal to the port entrance, pass by the patrol, and enter through the door. Don't be too slow or he'll see you. I'm glad we're still doing the codec calls to tell us how to open doors instead of just giving us the prompt. It's so much more expedient. It's so much more awesome and good. The timing for this hallway is a little tighter. You have to go slow around the corner. Then you can either hide and wait for him to turn or follow him closely and move around his blind spot. Now, the lounge is actually easy if you don't have a cold, which happens for some reason if you're outside for too long, even though I was outside for maybe 15 seconds maximum. Either way, just tranquilize the two guys and move up the stairs to the crew's quarters. Around the hallway, up there is a patrol that always turns to his right. I failed to observe this the first time around, and if I was patient, I would have hit this way earlier. Move past him, turn the corner to this staircase, and move on over to the port side quarters. Immediately hit a left through the mess hall, wait for the patrol inside to turn his back to you. On this timing, the camera should be pointed away, then round the corner and take the final staircase to the bridge. As you can see, these are all very tight turns, very strict timing. The only time I really needed to modify it was in the lounge with my M9 because, as I said, you have a cold, which is, if you're not acquainted and properly skilled with the fundamental stealth mechanics, you will be punished for it later. And the action mechanics modify those. They aren't tangential. Take the door to the left and begin the battle against Olga. What I appreciate the most about Olga is that she insta-kills you anytime she hits you. Unfortunately, not all the bosses followed this premise, but they should have. In terms of approach, I've seen ways to cheese this, but given that both methods I saw were incidental, relying on loops, I decided to just take the fight the proper way, which ended up being less difficult than I thought it would be, or rather less tedious than I thought it would be. The fight in the first half is about managing and or avoiding Olga's aggression and then flanking her to deal damage. Quite simple, but challenging and rewarding since she always has the chance to kill you at any time. The difficulty increases in 2 stages. One where she frees the tarp, after which, if you shoot her enough, proceeds to the 3rd phase, during which she turns the lights on. The light stage is the hardest since you can't see her at all if you're looking directly at her, but she's also much more ready to shoot you than she is in the 2nd phase. And if you try to flank her from the far side of your space, she'll just turn the light right back towards you. Since she insta-kills you, generally you have to operate on a timing. She'll shoot, she'll move, and then you've basically got until she reloads to flank and shoot her. In the 1st phase, you're not running on time as much, but it gets stricter and stricter in the 2nd and 3rd phase to the point that in the 3rd phase, it's best to stay behind cover until she reloads or pulls out a grenade. It's a very well designed, very challenging opening boss. Once you're done with Olga, you gotta go all the way back downstairs into the ship, keep moving through the quarters into the lounge, and then one more level down into the engine room. I took a picture of Vulcan Raven here since I assumed I'd get a cool voice line from Otacon, but I got nothing. I don't know why it's here. The engine room is one of the tougher rooms for me since I was reluctant to use my M9 at the beginning throughout the tanker, and rightfully so since you'll want full reserves for the hallway section, which again is another proof of my original space-time hypothesis. The degree to which I modified this part is extreme. It requires quite a few shots, more than you would want to use. If you're just good with the fundamental stealth, able to conform to the space, then you won't have such a problem with the shootout that will occur later. I'm sure there's a neat way to get all the way around, but my method was to just trank the one guy below this staircase, then the 2 guys on the far side, after which I crossed on the wire. I will say the layout of the lower floors is cool, but it was easier for me to just put shots on target and move on to the bomb defusal, which is a really pointless extension of the gameplay, I'll say. It would have been better if the patrol returned more often and you had to deactivate the fuse controls under pressure, but that is not the case. So it is what it is, and I will appraise it as such. Run down the hall till you get to deck 2 and begin the shootout. You start with 3 guys at the other end of the corridor, and as you dispatch them, their numbers are gradually replenished with new troops. It took me a while since I had honestly forgotten about quick shots, but once I started using them again, I started making progress. The Olga battle, and this to a greater degree, use the first person leaning to excellent effect, and in this shootout specifically, we actually get challenged beyond our capacity to take cover, unlike in Olga, since there's 3 dudes that just walk up to you and shoot at you. It is especially effective since first-person aiming in MGS2 has no aim assist, making it very difficult because of the acceleration to track moving targets. So the fact that you're inclined to be behind cover, which is off-axis from them, makes them that much harder to drop the first time around. I solve this by simply moving to the left and parallel to their movements, but this doesn't really make the rest of the fight any easier. As with Olga, there's no trick that works 100% of the time. You just have to be appropriately acquainted and skilled in the use of the game's mechanics to be able to beat the level. That's all there is to it. Win or game over. Although I don't think the design of this fight would be significantly diminished if someone found an exploit, since it is not nearly as mechanically meritorious as Olga's, mostly due to the fact that the difficulty is lower and the need to adjust your aim is not as great, given the fact that it takes place within a hallway. Once you pass the Russians, you enter the inside of the ship with the 3 holds. First of all, this timer is way too long. It should be minimum 5 times as fast, but really it shouldn't be longer than a minute 15. And then once you get into the Ray room, you get a supplementary 45 seconds, or it could just be 2 minutes total. I'm not even close to being good at this game, and there were 4 minutes 56 seconds left when I uploaded the final photo, meaning I used roughly 30% of the total time allotted. Timing sections like this are great since they put extra pressure on the player to perform across more than one section as well. It's challenging the player to have mechanical consistency in that fundamental space over the time given, which again conforms to that hypothesis I put forth at the beginning. I was forced to take the ladder down since I didn't have enough health to make the drop from the ledge. This didn't change my time that much though. Dive under the projector, walk across the inside, move into the next room. Move to the right and hit the projector, then line yourself up here and dive 3 times across the metal structures. Your last job is to get the photos of Metal Gear Ray, which isn't nearly as difficult as traversal in the prior 2 holds. Don't worry about getting detected. You can only be seen if you walk over to the far left of the room. The speech section isn't very well designed since the threat of detection is only from serious mistakes, which come from risk-taking to reduce time spent. However, there's no impetus for risk given the time allotted for completion is so great. Once you get the photos, that's it. It's a very anticlimactic finish to this act of the game, or rather this half of the first act, at least in gameplay. The cutscene is quite awesome, so I don't mind it that much. On to the big shell. You start out in the submarine dock with 0 patrols for some reason. There's a shaver to your right. There were also thermal goggles down in the water, but I neglected to get them. Most of all, since you don't really need them, but that's besides the point. The only time you do need them, they're given to you, which is the sniper mission. There's 3 guys in the elevator room knocked out, but when you call the elevator, they'll wake up. So to avoid this, I did what I did when I played the game on hard the first time around, which was drag them into the lockers. Now, I forgot that there was one guy over here, but it didn't really make a difference. Now that you're on the roof, you'll take the left exit down into the pump room. There's 1 patrol left here. However, you don't need to move to the strut F connector, which is on the far side of this guy's patrol. So just take the closer exit to the AB connector anyways. There's no challenge in doing that. There should be at least 2 guys down here, as it is when you come back around for the bomb defusal. The AB connector is a split bridge with 2 paths controlled by alternating patrols. The one on the right from your current entry will be facing away, and the other patrol won't see you, so take that path. Cartwheel over the 2 loud panels, hug the inside while the guard turns around, and then prone into strut B. GW in the codec informs you to hang, but you don't need to, though that you can, and that you can do so efficiently is a proof for the kind of multifaceted, formula-based gameplay I described in my introductory arguments. It's not done with a special item like chaff. It's part of the player's basic toolset and enabled by the level design. There's no stealth after this cutscene. You just walk into the dining hall and get another cutscene. A dud! If there were ever a time for a timer in this game, it would be here. Can you imagine how much better it would be if the entire defusal, or even just every 3 bombs, had a time limit on it? The usefulness of a timer, besides the enhanced difficulty from the increased severity of the checkpoints, is that a time limit, which is different from a speed run or performance timer, is one of the few ways to force a player to conform to the game's objectives, rather than just scoring for how much he conformed to them after beating the game. To make the decision between the safe option out of consistency or the high risk option for performance's sake won't happen unless there is risk in failure or the possibility of. Even without a timer, the bombs are still a great way for the developers to mix up the fundamental stealth mechanics within the same levels and force the player to invent new passages through the space-time of gameplay. How better to force the player to change their routine than to put obstacles necessary to interact with in hard-to-reach places? It's a really good design, but gimmicks like this unfortunately weren't used to mix up the level design outside of the first act. Either way, I froze the bomb in the bathroom first. There's 2 soldiers in the dining hall, one in the cafeteria and the other in the little plant median near the connecting bridge. Enter the bathroom, freeze the bomb, check the room with a lean, then exit to the BC connector. There's a cipher here, and you can either shoot it, or you can wait for it to descend and then pass into the Strut B transformer room. The transformer room has 2 guys patrolling it, and the adjacent hallway is filled with cameras, making it very hard to pass. Getting through the transformer room is easy though, but doing it while defusing a bomb is a little harder, so I went in, defused, exited, and reset to get through. Normally, you just take the inside room, then follow the patrol down to the far door, then exit into the hallway and towards the bridge. Resolving the bridge is the same as when you entered, it's just mirrored. There are 2 bombs in Strut A, one on the roof, one in the pump room. You can do them in either order, but I went upstairs first. There's 1 patrol on the roof around these boxes. Enter from the right side, wait for him to turn towards you, run over, defuse the bomb, then exit from whence you came and cross over into the pump room. This place is a little overcomplicated since you have to crawl under the pipes here, and the path to the bomb isn't obvious at first glance. Move straight till you come to these stairs, then go into a prone crawl, reach this red pipe, turn left, or rather down, and the bomb is right there. If you want the box, there's another staircase on the other side, and you have to wait for this guy to pass, then go all the way back around to avoid the camera, but you do have to wait for the patrol to come back around. Exit back through the adjacent room into the Strut F connector, wait for this patrol to turn around, then move into the far left room and get the M9. You could hypothetically trank everyone in here, which is what I should have done, but I exited out the lower level door to reset the patrols, after which I attempted a few defusals from the lower level, but eventually decided it would be more effective to just go back upstairs and attempt to defuse from that starting point. This place is crawling with bad guys, and probably one of the most difficult rooms in the game. I spent almost an hour trying to get through it undetected. There are 2 patrols on the top, 2 on the ground floor, and then 1 in the room on the ground floor of the EF connector exit, and their patrols constantly overlap sight lines. The EF connector is supposed to be like the snowy field in Shadow Moses because of the mines, which Olga tells you about, but unlike the snowy field, it is actually challenging, at least slightly, to pass through because of the ciphers and the guy up on the perch. He sees everything, and you can either try to tranquilize him or wait for him to pass. Thankfully, while he's up there, you can get the ciphers in the meantime. After all, just prone crawl across and pick up the claymores as you go. Make sure to get all of them because you will be crossing into Shell 1 from this point. The parcel room is definitely the third most difficult in the game, at least if you don't have a silent SOCOM. If you can knock out the cameras with a chaff, the room is kind of easy, but doing it with pure stealth requires very good timing. There are 2 cameras watching both of the outside routes from your entry, then a third camera on the far side of the room watching the outside route near the exit. On the inside, there's one guy who will see you if you approach too early. He moves towards the center of the map to meet a second guy who enters from the staircase to your right. Then there's 2 more guys watching the conveyor belts on the far side, and they intermittently change their viewing positions. So yeah, not really easy at all. However, this goes to show that the game is actually covering all the bases when it comes to enemy patrols, unlike every single other Metal Gear game we've played so far. The conveyor belts are purposefully not climbable either. You can only go prone under them in certain spots, and the only way to climb onto them is in certain prescribed zones. Prone crawling under them is a risk given the speed of enemy patrols. Quite a few times I was caught because I took too long to crawl somewhere. You could try to tranquilize them, but many angles are obstructed and many unobstructed angles expose you for too long or are in front of cameras anyways. If you want to do it easily, get the silencer back in strut F or bring a chaff, which is what I did. Drop a chaff, equip the box, and box walk up the stairs. Then you'll get a cutscene up on the staircase to the helipad. The helipad itself is patrolled by 2 dudes, one on each side. Take the far side over to the Harrier, then go prone and freeze the bomb under the landing gear. Avoiding the patrols on the way back is easy. I'm pretty sure box walking lowers your profile enough to get by. Once you're back in the parcel room, wait for this patrol to turn around, then box walk up to this position and take out your coolant. This method does take forever, but it does work. It's just not as prone to failure as other methods. Once you're donezo with that, prone crawl over to the DE connector. This bridge has 1 guy patrolling on the bridge and maybe 1 or 2 guys, I'm not sure, on the bridges in the distance. This I genuinely think is a stupid mechanic. I don't think it needs to be in the game, just having random guys in the distance that you can't see or would even be inclined to believe could see you in the game. It doesn't really make sense, especially since the guy on the bridge has no way to see you. His patrol isn't fast enough for that. It's not a very logical design. The sediment pool in Strut D is another one of the hardest rooms in the game. I did spend 15 minutes less on it than the warehouse in Strut F, so maybe Strut F is actually more difficult to solve. All of this aside, there are 3 more bombs in here, all 3 downstairs. You won't be using much ammo for your M9 till Fat Man, so I just went for that strategy. Alternatively, you can just enter from downstairs with the box and time your bomb freezes. It's going to be difficult no matter what, so you might as well just get used to it. When you get back into the dining hall to get your sensor B, you're going to be given 200 seconds to get back to the submarine port in Strut A. Obviously, exit the dining hall first, then shoot down the cipher, or wait. You should probably save your ammo in order to knock down Fat Man. Follow behind this guy, take the door, exit onto the connector bridge. The method is the exact same as it was before. Time their patrols, follow behind on the inside, then prone to the exit. Once inside Strut A, go upstairs and take the elevator. I've already described why the timer is such a great addition to the game, but in all honesty, this timer should have been used in the tanker speech, or rather both of these should have had 2-minute timers. The bomb is over here, by the way. Once you're done, the Fortune encounter begins. I say encounter because you never fight Fortune in this game. Never once do you damage her, nor are you ever intended to damage her. In the stead of a boss battle, you're required to evade her attacks until the boss fight ends. She double taps on a consistent timing. You just need to move back and forth to evade it. It's not a very difficult encounter, and honestly a waste of time. Not to say it shouldn't be in the game. There is an argument for how this conforms to the fundamental stealth mechanics and how it's an abstraction of those, considering how those work. It does demonstrate that space-time principle. You are dodging shots on a timing and occupying a safe space. The problem is that it's so easy because that space is too large. In this case, the dangerous space, the failure state, is only as large as the railgun shot, when in order to truly demonstrate MGS2's ideas, it would have to be the opposite. The small space in a given time would have to be the safe and proper passage to take, not the large one. However, that's what they could have done. What they actually did is not so great. Even before the encounter is over, you'll get a call from GW informing you that Fat Man wants to battle you atop the helipad. Take the left exit once the elevator arrives and descend into the pump room. There's an additional patrol now, which is why it's important to enter from the left because he'll see you otherwise. Knock him out, then move over to the FA connector. On this bridge, there's nobody new, so just cartwheel across. In strut F, the resolution is the same. The EF connector, though, is made more difficult since you're on a timer. You can't just wait for the staircase patrol to leave. You have to take out these ciphers first and then him. So at least the timer is forcing you to change your strategies, meaning it fulfilled its purpose. Once you get into the strut E parcel room, immediately drop a chaff, then box walk towards the stairs on the right side and back up to the heliport. After this, nobody's here, so just go to the bomb and freeze it. I finished with less than 30 seconds remaining. Fat Man was the most difficult boss for me personally. The reason for this is that I did not fully understand the level to which he embodied the space-time continuum premise of MGS2 that I am currently asserting. I had originally believed from playing on hard difficulty that Fat Man would always put a timer on his bombs such that it would be possible to defuse them. Granted, I knew in the back of my head that if you didn't shadow him as he planted, that there's a chance he wouldn't allow you to defuse them, and your game would be over the moment he hits the timer. So this hypothesis that I had as a newbie was already proven false in my subconscious. I was frustrated at first, and originally in my appraisal going to make the point that European Extreme was overtuned because they had inadvertently, in making the timers harder to defuse within, actually in some cases made it impossible to freeze the bombs in time, thereby creating instant failure states where the player still has to watch that timer count down and give him the game over. However, it is exactly because there are impossible timers on European Extreme that the space-time continuum principle of gameplay is preserved. By having a somewhat randomized space to pass through, that is, a route on which he throws out bombs in different places, but having a timer which over the fight becomes shorter and shorter, Fat Man forces the player to use the action principle of the stealth segments in inverted space-time, sacrificing time, that is, knocking down Fat Man instead of defusing the bombs while he plants them, to create space to damage his stamina. And yes, all action games do operate on spacing and routing and whatnot, which is obviously the rebuttal. But on that note, what are the spacing and positioning principles here? They are based off the core stealth gameplay loop. Only if the player sacrifices the time that Fat Man uses to plant the bombs to attack and knock him over can you actually win. It is not normal action gameplay where you dodge his hitboxes and apply your own. Only if the player sacrifices the time that Fat Man uses to plant the bombs to attack and knock him over can you actually win. Unlike normal gameplay space-time, which ebbs and flows, troops going back and forth on an endless loop. Space-time as a whole in Fat Man's boss battle is ever shrinking and inverted. Instead of space being passed through over time, time is being passed through over space. Eventually, the player will hit a failure state if he chooses to defuse the bombs. It is the illusion that you have space and are running out of time, the idea that the bombs can be defused at all, as they are in normal stealth gameplay, which would cause someone unacquainted or unskilled as myself to believe every timer would allow defusal. In reality, you have time and are running out of space. Fat Man will complete his route and set a timer, probably ending your attempt. This is demonstrably not the same as it being a regular action game, spacing yourself according to his hitboxes, according to an attack pattern. You're spacing yourself according to a time pattern. Defusing the bombs is not the success route but the failure state. It means you lost track of Fat Man and now he has the potential to put you in an impossible to resolve situation, thereby instantly ending your attempt to beat him as you see that the time was too short. Once you understand this, the fight actually becomes very enjoyable. In fact, all the fastest and most effective ways involve shadowing him on his route to down him. The space-time principle is taken to a much higher level within an action framework, being as it is an action segment, and the solution is, of course, dead simple once you figure it out, but even once you figure it out, and even though it does sound really easy, of course, just shadow him and shoot him, it's very mechanically demanding of the player to execute, especially to execute in the most time-efficient way possible. Fat Man is not easy to catch. It really is an awesome and very well-designed fight, even if I hated it at first and it took me 3+ hours to beat. Party's over. And that line really does depict the shift in objective design from the first act to the second. It's time to get down to business, as Olga gives you the rundown on the hostage situation. Descend into the parcel room, sleep the first patrol, and drop a chaff. Move down the stairway, drop the second guy, then box walk over to the exit. There's probably a more efficient way to do this, but there's probably a more efficient way to do this. I ran out of ammo for my USP after Fat Man since he's so fat, so I had to use chaff again to move past the ciphers. The next task in the Strut F warehouse has to be one of the most stringent timings I've had to hit in the entire game. You can't go too early because the guy in the catwalk will see you. You can't go too late because the guy in the ground floor will see you. Then, once you're on the ground floor, it's even more difficult because you have to get the space and time just right. Once inside this room, you have to be at this exact spot for just a few seconds and then move around this shelf, but not too close to the bad guy here. So basically, enter, wait 3 seconds, descend the stairs, go around the corner to enter the room with the AK, wait at this exact spot for about 2 seconds, go around these crates, knock this guy out, grab the AK, then hastily move back to the connector. So I would argue this strut is actually the most difficult, or at least this part of the strut. Although, now that I think of it, given the amount of continues I've put into Strut F, I would say it's arguably more difficult than Strut D. Next up is the EF connector, and I ran out of bullets. Thankfully, you don't need any ammo to disguise yourself as one of Colonel Galukovich's men, so you can just use the AK to gun down the ciphers. Make sure to flip over the loose panels so you don't have to waste time hanging. The Shell 1 section is a little silly though, from a game design perspective. It's cool that you get to just walk around these guys right under the nose of the enemy and even get free stuff from their lockers, but it's not difficult and just part of a better premise, which is sneaking around the hostages to find the guy. These sections would be better designed if more player behaviors were considered suspicious. For instance, since soldiers always move in straight lines and pivot instead of making arcing turns like the player does, the devs could have forced you to use the D-pad for movement while disguised and not allow you to make your normal turns otherwise you'd get detected. It doesn't matter though, this part is silly. If anything, you should just get a cutscene of Raiden sneaking into Shell 1 and taking the elevator to the hostages downstairs. Sure, the eye scan thing is gameplay, but it's nowhere near challenging and doesn't demand anything on the player's part, due to the fact that the soldier outside is completely alone. Oh, and by the way, the directional microphone thing, I practically got a PTSD flashback to the adventure game crap in MGS1. Really, really stupid. There could have easily been one in the hostage room. It's not hard to get the directional microphone considering you can still do it while disguised. It would have been slightly difficult if you were only allowed to use the D-pad, but alas, that is not the case. Either way, Ames, your target, has a high hairline and a short ponytail, so that's how you know he's your guy. Walk up to him and make sure no one sees you, take out the microphone, and press triangle. I neglected to do this and didn't know why nothing was happening. You have to press triangle for some reason, otherwise the event doesn't trigger. The directional microphone semi-cutscene thing is stupid. Please do not ever put unskippable gimmick segments in your game. Now that Ocelot has found you, you are given a mandatory caution, which you can just wait out in the elevator on the first floor. Once that's over, drop a chaff, tranquilize the two guys in the hall, and exit to the connector. Destroy the ciphers with your replenished SOCOM ammo, then enter strut F again to get the PSG-1 and PSG-1T, then back across the EF connector and into the parcel room. As I said before, this room would be way easier with a silenced SOCOM, and it is. Just disable the cameras and box walk around to the exit. Make sure to pick up the Zone of the Enders box on your way there, because it's a cool box. Also, box walk across the DE connector, otherwise this guy will see you. It's another one of those silly guy in the distance sees you parts. The sediment pool is easier this time, since you only need to move halfway across the room rather than all the way across, which is at least 3 times harder provided you're not tranquilizing anyone, and of course even harder if you have to make stops in between to defuse bombs. However, I'm terrible at this, so I just decided to tranquilize everyone and stroll through. The little range defusal section is not that great. It's just a way to attempt to make you use your PSG-1, even though the PSG-1 is arguably only advisable for the cipher control units. It isn't necessary for any part of this. This section is also not very good since your aiming skills were tested to a greater degree against Olga, and it's also not timed. If there were a tripwire which set off a timer, for instance, and all the control things were on ciphers, and you had to shoot them all down, kind of like the Puyon mission or something like that. That would be kind of cool. But of course, they didn't do that, and what is here sucks. No matter how I attempt to appreciate this section, it's just a pointless roadblock unless it's given a countdown. Next up is the battle against Solid Snake.
No, that is not Solid Snake.
President George Sears. The Harrier battle is pretty awesome, even if it's routine. The Harrier has a select number of attack patterns that it cycles through, and it only gets super aggressive in the second phase of the fight. In the first phase, it's actually rather passive, but the good part of the design here is that for the most part, you have to expose yourself to attack it. It also actually disappears before attacking, so in the first phase, it's most dangerous when you can't see it. This is also true to a degree with its rotary cannon and rocket barrage attacks, since taking cover is necessary to survive them and you can't really fight back until they're over. If you're not behind cover before these attacks happen, you're basically cooked anyways, so the necessity of visual spatial awareness is still required. I'm not quite sure I understand the intentions behind the presence of Solid and Otacon in the Kasatka. There was only one time they obstructed my view, and they don't do anything in the fight either, but neither does President Sears attack them, so they're just a non-factor in the confrontation. For me personally, the missile barrage and the rotary cannon were the hardest to defeat. Conversely, the afterburner, the burn baby attack, and cluster bombs were actually very easy. The method for the cluster bomb is to stand here in the middle, wait for your controller to vibrate, and then flip into a hang. I think it's a really great use of the vibration function and would probably go underappreciated if not for me mentioning it right now. For the afterburner attack, just do a flip as soon as you see the cutscene. It's a little too inconsequential. The method for the whole fight is pick up a stinger, fire 3 times at the president, then track him into the distance, fire again as he approaches, and 2 to 3 more times as he flies around for another attack. Loop the last few steps. He'll go for either cluster bombs or afterburners, after which he'll usually say something like, "You're tougher than I thought," and then he'll fire a homing missile. This missile can unfortunately be dodged in numerous ways, and it isn't difficult to defeat. After this, he'll fly under the bridge and ascend to do either rockets or his rotary cannon, and then you've got a chance to shoot him 4 times. Then he'll loop this entire procedure again and maybe throw in a rotary cannon or a rocket attack in there again too. My issue with this fight is that the timings are too slow. The missiles don't fly fast enough. The president doesn't circle the arena fast enough either. It makes the fight take longer than it should, but also makes it easier than it should be. When he circles and disappears into the distance, this should take maybe 5 seconds total, but it takes 15. Making it a very easy pattern where you can score too many cheap hits. The fight is mechanically different for the most part, since there is no space-time manipulation in the way that it occurs in the levels rather than the bosses. However, I should add, or rather clarify at this point, that the space-time manipulation concept is a hypothesis I have regarding the nature of gameplay and not its quality or merit. That's just something I need to add, that whether a boss or a segment conforms to this space-time manipulation is either a confirmation or refutation of my theory, not a position or appraisal of the quality of the gameplay itself. The part right after the Harrier here, this jump, is stupid. I hate that this part is defined by this one silly leap you have to do, where you can't actually judge whether you'll make it. Yes, I know you can hang and then go across the pipe or whatever, but that's also stupid. There's no merit in polluting your stealth action game with a platforming segment. It's still simple though. Jump over, use the coolant to get the AK silencer, then tranquilize these 2 guys. Slowly make your way across the balcony here, then this catwalk, then if you want, take out the ciphers. Pretty inconsequential overall. The Nikita adventure inside Shell 2, I'm not even going to cover. It sucks. It shouldn't be in the game. We all know it. We all know it's stupid. Okay, genuinely, probably the low point of MGS2 as a game. At least the cutscene is kind of cool. Once you've picked up the body armor, go to battle Vamp. This fight is really easy since you're exploiting a loop he does. Hang off the ledge here or anywhere until he approaches and goes to knife you, then jump up, hit him, stay in range of his knife attack to bait out another one, then circle around and keep hitting him. Repeat that until he's defeated. Does this demonstrate good design on the part of the developers? Perhaps, since you are using your mechanical skill to essentially lock him into this loop. It's not a loop that he's locked into regardless of you. You are a one-hit kill at this point. It's not like it's just completely easy and if you just sit in the other corner of the map, he's going to keep doing this. It is a loop that you are perpetuating by mechanical skill, like plenty of other loops in Metal Gear Solid. So regardless, the problem is not that there is an exploit, it's that this exploit is very trivial to do. The best of them are actually difficult to perform and not easy. Vamp is not that great as a boss fight. Emma's section is up next, and I have to say, in terms of like subjective opinions, I actually don't hate this section. I don't hate the water. I don't hate the swimming. I don't know why people hate the swimming. It's actually really easy to do, and it's not that egregious. Sure, it is just traversal. It's about as bad from a design standpoint as that stupid little flip you have to do. But in terms of being an affront to my senses and being manually abrasive, as water sections in non-water games famously are, I would say it's not that bad. Furthermore, novel traversal mechanics are not anywhere close to as bad as invasive adventure game design. It's also not difficult at all, so you won't be stuck on it for long if you are. So now that we're in the hard part upstairs, our first move is to lead Emma out of the elevator into the middle of the hallway, turn, and fire at the approaching soldier. Once you lead Emma into this little break room, turn again and take out this guy. Or miss him first try like a chump and turn the corner to actually sleep him. Lead Emma to the end of the next hallway, move to the corner, tranquilize the close guard, then move down to get the guy behind the crate. The last guy enters from this hallway right here. Once outside, there's a cipher or two to take care of and a guy on the other side of the bridge. If you run up to tranquilize him first, make sure to sleep him again once you lead Emma over, since he'll be waking up by then. The very last stage, you have to leave Emma at the door, drop these two guys, and lead her through. The most immediate thing I noticed about Emma's section is that it's an escort section which doesn't play like absolute garbage. How did they achieve this? By putting Emma under your control. The player being able to make the choice of how and when the target moves towards the objective means that Emma is a variable but not an uncontrolled one. The player's space-time has been changed to the extent that their time is shortened when holding on to Emma due to the slower traversal rate, but every other factor is the same. Essentially, they have to create more space with the time they sacrifice, or more time with the space they sacrifice. It is, I would argue, against any who deride it, good design. The sniping section is the second most controversial part of the game, mainly because it can really suck if you don't understand it. However, if you do know the routine, then it's not that bad. It's still extraneous since the scope shake is still in the game, and because this is resolved with an item, but it's not as bad as something like Sniper Wolf 1 or 2. Now, what is cool is that the space-time continuum is still present. It's just you're sacrificing all your time to enable someone else's space. You essentially can't move, but herein is the issue, that you can move, but very little enables situations like this, where there's one little claymore you can't see if you're sitting on the ammo box spawn location. Sure, this does add a choice to the player's sniping point, but is that itself meaningful? No, probably because, like me, you keep getting owned when Emma spontaneously combusts a third of the way across the final pipe.
Emma, open your eyes. Emma! Emma!
That was totally a meaningful thing to put in the game. However, let's compare the insignificance of this choice to the significance of ammo boxes spawning at different points. Focusing on one type of enemy, the patrols, means you'll have to be on one side, and the other two obstacles, the claymore and ciphers, you'll be on the other side. It is not an intolerable segment and isn't as alien to the core design as it might appear. Vamp's part should have been a cutscene. This is a little silly. The time segment running back through the big shell is cool. I'm always happy to play through a timed segment. And having to find your way out of a novel section which you haven't been in before is always good, because backtracking is not really good if you're not going to vary it, especially if you're not going to vary it with actually difficult parts like this guy. It is not difficult to tranquilize this guy. Why is he here? That is the main problem with the backtracking in this segment, is that it's too easy. The timer is also a minute too long. It's a mismatch of principles, and there aren't enough guys in your way to stop you. So, pretty pointless. Now that Raiden is on board Arsenal gear, take the exit from the torture room up on the right. You enter a long hallway filled with Tengu guards, wait for this guy to turn right, and then run behind him. Then straight all the way down to the final staircase on the left. Take the bridge as the camera turns away, then pass behind this Tengu into the tunnel. The Arsenal gear stealth section is far too easy and doesn't hold up to the stealth on the big shell. Given that your capacity to implement the action mechanics of the game are severely diminished, the stealth should remain the same or even become more difficult as a mostly pure test of the fundamentals of the game. But they aren't. In fact, this is by far the easiest stealth section in MGS2. What the hell, man? Snake gives you your gear and Raiden suits up, and you go deeper into Arsenal to battle all the Tengu. The first confrontation occurs in a wide corridor, essentially a shooting gallery. The issue with the Tengu attacks, as I see it, is that they are not possible without Snake, yet at his high competency level, he basically just does everything for you. It can certainly help to offer support with your M9, but since there's no non-lethal automatic, if you stick your head out too much, you just get owned instantly. The other problem is that cover is sometimes too effective. For instance, if you take cover behind these low, waist-high obstructions, they just don't shoot you for some reason. Only in the third phase do the Tengu actually start hitting you if you take cover behind one of these. Sure, the HF blade can block bullets, but it can't block them from every angle you're going to be attacked from if you dive into the battle. You obviously can't block while attacking, meaning you have to sleep P90 Tengus anyways. Furthermore, the HF blade has an unsheathing animation that, as far as I know, cannot be cancelled. I like this weapon, but it's not very useful in its prescribed niche against the Tengu, and it never could be as consistent as just letting Snake aimbot snap on Tengu heads for 10 minutes. Herein, we see that the outcome in determination of effective gameplay strategies in a poorly balanced or even poorly designed segment tends towards degenerate or cheesy methods. Were the HF blade balanced or redesigned to better represent a previously developed mechanical skill, or even just rebalanced within its intended niche, the devs could have induced much more elegant gameplay on the part of the player. Because they didn't, all that can be appreciated is that the outcome is not in alignment with the intention, and that the outcome in itself is also not meritorious. Therefore, this segment cannot be appraised as meritorious either. The Ray battle is excellent. It is entirely built upon the space-time principle of the core gameplay, such that the Rays are even turning this principle back on you. This unity in space-time between stealth and action is embodied in the Ray's attack patterns. Active Rays, when attacking, don't move. Same as you. Generally, the method to defeat a single active Ray, and by active we mean the Ray in the center, and by inactive we mean the Rays in the background, is to circle them and fire at their knees, then into their open maw to do maximum damage. The Ray will attempt to disrupt this with their attacks, obviously, and then by properly evading that attack, you'll have another chance to damage them. Or you can cancel it with your own attack. Raiden necessarily sacrifices time to evade to attack the active Ray. That is, to create space-time free of the time-sensitive enemy hitboxes. Yet, this is really an extrapolation of simple action gameplay. How does this conform to the hypothesis of space-time? The background Rays, the inactive Rays, contribute with overhead missile barrages, which creates the full space-time continuum. The constant threat of the overhead missiles means that Raiden has to function on a timing. The attack patterns of active Metal Gear Rays do not fully qualify as timing-based, because they are based on Raiden's proximity to them. So we see that the semi-homing nature of the overhead missile barrage, which literally has a beeper counting down as it flies down to you, which literally has a countdown as it flies towards you, is the origin of a space-time passage that Raiden is forced to follow. The variation of timing on the overhead attacks by the inactive Rays and the active Ray determining attack method based on space essentially means the safe passage in the space-time gameplay is ever changing and up to the player to understand and act accordingly to. For Raiden to stop moving to attack with the stinger is to sacrifice time to create space free of enemy hitboxes. This is so for both active and inactive rays, since the knee strike cancels their attacks. For Raiden to keep moving is to route through the space-time created by the overlapping attack patterns of the rays. That is, to move through space acquires time in which he is not under threat, which he then sacrifices to gain more space by attacking with the stinger. Even the beginning, phase 0, we'll call it, has you sacrificing an indefinite amount of time for yourself by standing still and using the stinger to sequentially lock the rays into hit stun, thereby producing, hypothetically, the maximum amount of space, ensuring there are no missiles airborne. If you fail to loop them in the first phase, the fight ends before it even begins, as space-time will gradually shrink under a constant barrage of missiles. It is for such a reason that insta-kill attacks like the Stomp and Water Cutter are necessary. Whereas missiles punish the misuse of time, the Stomp and Water Cutter, being at least 5 times as fast as the knee missiles in Arm Gun, punish the misuse of space. It is impossible, as far as I'm aware, at least in terms of human ability, to cancel the Water Cutter as it comes out, only before. The Ray Onslaught is practically on its own a proof of my space-time hypothesis. The bosses of Metal Gear Solid 2 force the player to engage in stealth gameplay in the abstract by the use of action mechanics within the space-time framework of that fundamental stealth gameplay. I must address the most substantial counter-argument, or at least what would appear to be one, which would obviously be the Rose method. As you can see, I did not employ this method to complete the game. To explain this method of completion, it utilizes the Ray controlled by Rose AI to protect the player and loop stinger attacks through rays as they parade towards the player. According to my observations, this method is not necessarily a safe spot method, because obviously if it were so, then the player could sit here and do nothing and survive. Yet, this is not so. If the player does nothing, the rays, besides Ray Rose, would just kill Raiden. It's not a safe spot. If it's not a safe spot, then what is it? It's obviously a loop, but what kind? The answer to this question leads us back to the space-time control described in Phase 0. You are still using the stinger to sequentially attack the rays, sacrificing all your time to induce the maximum amount of space. Even if I think it's cheesy and degenerate and think it ruins the fun of the whole confrontation, it does conform to my space-time hypothesis. Now, even though it is not a contradiction of my hypothesis, I will say that the Ray battle in itself is worse off because of the permission of this method. It's fine to have something like this on the second highest difficulty, but the highest difficulty needs to, as I stated, purge such activities out of the realm of viability. My last personal complaint is the fact that it should have ended by destroying a ray and then cut to something else rather than transition in the middle of gameplay. What I want to say last about this confrontation is that it is awesome. Obviously a subjective point, but I want to say it, so I will. You never get to do stuff this cool in the action segments of Metal Gear, at least not as a rule. And yes, Peace Walker does let you fight epic kaiju monster dinosaurs, tanks, helicopters, and even Metal Gears and other assorted heavy armor. But be honest, do you get to do it like this? This is sick. This is epic. The sound design practically knocks it out of the park, especially the water cutter sound effect, all the stomping and squawking from the horde of rays. It's intense, it's great, it's awesome, and I can't overstate that. Solidus is a somewhat disappointing boss, at least to me. I know that isn't a valid appraisal, or even an appraisal at all, but it must be said before I jump into that. He is not challenging to defeat. Regardless of whether he conforms to the space-time principles, and I don't really think that he does. I don't care about infinite loops if they demand something of the player mechanically, if they are challenging. But what is mechanically challenging about the infinite loop here? Bait the kick, strike twice, wait for him to raise his swords, make him block your attack to bait the next kick. It is a sort of counterintuitive infinite and very specific since it operates on controls and mechanics completely unique to this fight, so I understand how it would be possible to miss it even with playtesting, but it nonetheless presents a problem that the final boss is such a pushover mechanically. It is true at least that if you can't hit this loop that there is some challenge to the fight. In the second phase, since you have to use first person to bait his attack and control his aggro, and there is some difficulty if you can't control the loop in the first phase from the missile attack, which is insanely hard to dodge if you're not right in front of him. You are controlling his aggro in both cases, you are responding and throwing out your own attacks, and there are clearly some well-implemented action mechanics. Yes, this loop does work on the aggression of Solidus, but does it demand something of the player to perform this? To succeed here? No. This fight in premise is awesome, but in execution doesn't really cut it. In fact, it's only marginally better than the Vamp fight, since unlike Vamp, you actually have to try. Does it look cool? Yeah, it's awesome, having a sword duel with President Solidus Snake atop the ruins of Federal Hall. That's epic. His flame dash is epic. But the fight isn't particularly meritorious in design. Or rather, we'll say meritorious in challenge, the same way Vamp isn't. At last, it's time to rank the acts and bosses. Let us declare that the first act is from the tanker to Fat Man's defeat, the second from Fat Man's defeat to the sniper mission, and the third from the sniper mission to the end of the game. We could, however, also divide it further into the tanker act, the first big shell, that is the infiltration to the Harrier, the second big shell, which would be the Harrier to Emma's demise, and the arsenal gear acts. It's tough. If we go by the first scheme, then the necessary ranking would be 1, 3, 2. If we go by the second scheme, it would be first big shell, arsenal gear, tanker, second big shell. The reason for this is that the bomb defusal stealth in the first act combined with Olga and Fat Man comes out with much higher net merit than the stealth in arsenal gear, combined with the Tengu attacks, Solidus, and the rays. The second act has the least to offer since even though the sniper mission is good, the stealth sections aren't on par either in design or challenge with the first act. Even though the third act does have pitiful stealth and the Tengu and Solidus battles aren't great either, it does have the Metal Gear Rays, which is the best action segment in the entire game. So we do have to rate it higher, if only marginally, than Act 2. The bosses from worst to best would be Fortune, Vamp, Tengu Attack 2, Tengu Attack 1, the Sniper Mission, the Ship Shootout, Solidus, Harrier, Olga,
Fat Man,
and finally the Metal Gear Rays. There's no competition for the Rays, so it's a little unfair to even have them in the ranking. They're minimum 4 times as good as Olga's battle. Everything Solidus and below fails in some degree to represent the core game design, or has some other fundamental flaw. The shootouts in Solidus battle are at least well designed in themselves, but the same cannot be said for Vamp and Fortune. Harrier and Olga are both representative of the core design while maintaining a unique and meritorious challenge independently. At last, it's time to rank the acts and bosses. Let us declare that the first act is from the tanker to Fat Man's defeat, the second from Fat Man's defeat to the sniper mission, and the third from the sniper mission to the end of the game. We could, however, also divide it further into the tanker act, the first big shell act, which would be from the infiltration to the Harrier, the second big shell act, which would be from the Harrier to Emma's demise, and the arsenal gear act. If we go by the first scheme, then the necessary ranking would be 1, 3, 2. If we go by the second scheme, it would be the first big shell, arsenal gear, tanker, and then the second big shell. The reason for this is that the bomb defusal stealth in the first act combined with Olga and Fat Man comes out with much higher net merit than the stealth in arsenal gear combined with the Tengu attack, Solidus, and the Rays, despite the fact that the Rays are the best boss in the game. The second act has the least to offer, since even though the sniper mission is good, the stealth sections aren't on par, either in design or challenge, with the first act. Even though the third act does have pitiful stealth, and the Tengu and Solidus battles aren't great either, it does have the Metal Gear raise, which again is the best action segment in the game, so we do have to rate it higher than 2. The aesthetic of Metal Gear Solid 2 is superb. It is a positively beautiful game which can actually be perceived by the player when it runs well at 60 FPS, unlike some other games. The color palettes of Arsenal Gear, the Tanker, and the Big Shell are not only great in themselves, but we can also recognize them in proximity to the Sons of Big Boss. That is, Arsenal Gear and the Tanker are depicted with a similar color palette, since the latter is associated with Solid, and the former with Solidus, and the Big Shell as a unique, blonder color palette, which is Raiden's own. The whole production design is just very well done. The seabirds at dawn on the Big Shell, the ambience of the storm outside on the Tanker, and the vocal accompaniment on board Arsenal Gear. Even down to the graphic design of the user interface, the menus and the binoculars. The typeface for the game is practically a microcosm of it. It's very slick. Of course, it's harder to describe why something is visually beautiful rather than mechanically, but I hope it is understood that in terms of production, Metal Gear Solid 2 is excellent. That's not to mention an actually good soundtrack. Listen to this. The theme. The main titles. Sediment Pool. Arsenal's Guts. Countdown to Disaster. Yell Dead Cell. Twilight Sniping. Father and Son. It's characteristic of a great soundtrack to not only have a collection of good songs, but to have no bad ones. The cutscenes are also well directed, which is surprising for a Kojima game. There are no cuts that take too long. There is action choreography actually present, not just head bobbing. I especially loved the performances of John Seigan as Solidus, Barry Dennen as Fat Man, Quentin Flynn as Raiden, and Jennifer Hale as Emma Emmerich. Fat Man is probably my favorite performance in the game, although I would like to say the best were Raiden, Emma, and Solidus in that order. I knew I liked Fat Man for some reason though, and later I looked up Dennen and found out he was in Dota 2, which to me explains plenty. That's besides the point though. The complaints about Raiden being the main character never made sense. What is the objection here? That you personally don't like it? It is an argument against the artist's ability to fulfill your vision, rather than fulfill the function of art. It doesn't even address whether Raiden is a stupid character or not, which in itself is a narrative critique, and I have already stated that critiquing the accidents of a narrative is not genuine appraisal of the work. Besides all this, Raiden is a swag character, a cool ninja dude with a cool Ninjato sword who blows up 25 Metal Gears. That's epic. That's cool. What's unfortunate in terms of cool characters is that President George Sears doesn't have nearly as much screen time doing awesome stuff as he should. He should have done more epic stuff with his cape on, more flame dashes and cutting things in half with swords, maybe throwing giant objects. I'm not sure exactly. I've heard people mention that in terms of the Metal Gear fanbase that Solidus has forgotten, which is only so because unlike Liquid, he doesn't have a long monologue with Raiden at the end. They just exchange short words and then fight, which is much better if you ask me, and arguably more masculine. But either ways, I'll never forget Solidus. These are all personal, subjective positions though. I have a few quandaries concerning the accidents of the narrative, even though it won't affect my final score. My first question is, why doesn't everybody just get along? In the final act, everyone betrays each other to destroy the Patriots, but that just means they all want to destroy the Patriots. Sure, they have their own individual goals, but why don't they just get along if they all hate the Patriots so much? The scene on top of Arsenal gear has them literally back-to-back betraying each other. Seriously? Just get along, guys. If everyone in this game realized even a second earlier that they were all there to stop the Patriots, they could have all lived happily ever after and defeated Ocelot, and this whole thing would be over. Another discrepancy is Solid telling you that murder is wrong, and Kojima clearly means this applies even to killing during warfighting, because that's what the scoring informs us of, and then Solid goes to gun down hundreds of dudes with an M4. You couldn't have given him a non-lethal to demonstrate this? It's a very silly decision, but ultimately irrelevant. Why does Solidus get played like a chump even though he's supposedly more perfect than Liquid? I guess it makes sense since Liquid technically had all the dominant genes yet was still fooled via indoctrination with false memes. And Solidus was betrayed in the same way. Revolver Ocelot in this game is undeniably a demon, being a subordinate to the Patriots for some reason, but it is not surprising given the fact that Jack is just as evil now, and therefore by betraying himself in a way, the personality of Liquid within him is an agent. What is interesting then is that the primary antagonist for most of the game, Solidus, is not a demon at all, as Volgin, Cypher, Zadornov, Coldman, Skullface, and Liquid were, but an agent, arguably even a hero to some degree. The tragedy of Solidus in respect to this is that he could stand to give up his demonic ways as a former subordinate of the Patriots, and as a warlord in Africa, and other such things, which were entirely evil without even the pretense of greater good, but could not fully accept a just method like his brother. Instead, he believed that there was still some necessity in evil, or evil in necessity. The worst of it all was how he planned to cut loose Dead Cell and let the resulting mayhem allow him to hunt down the Patriots. Couldn't he have just, I don't know, told them to do something more productive? It's not like he wouldn't be able to control them. The obstacle to being the Exxon he desired to become was the immorality he took on in his ambition to become one. The intron-exon dichotomy here is the substance of the narrative. The Patriots want to control information by determining what is coded into the greater societal organism, in the same way introns are removed before the remaining exons are coded into mRNA, normally messenger RNA, but in this case, mimetic RNA. GW and the other Patriot AIs operate as spliceosomes in the internet. The hubris is in the belief that they are capable of controlling human evolution. Memes are certainly more important than genes when it comes to combat effectiveness, but for the Patriots to say that they could use them to control evolution itself is utter delusion. However, it was to be effective, considering the state and society are mimetic organisms. But there are always those who will reject the memes of society, or at least the memes of what is perceived to be consensus, the authority by majority, for things they on their own hold to be true, regardless of the veracity of those beliefs. It is Solid's mistake to say that merely because someone holds to a belief or ideal that it is irrelevant whether the ideal in question is good or bad. His denial of reality is also immoral and, on its face, untrue. There are certainly some things which are real and not real, and as a warfighter, he should know this. This is such a bizarre reversal from his realization in MGS-1, which was that he had to live for something besides himself. Surely he does not think that fighting for something which is wrong is just as acceptable as fighting for something which is right. And perhaps that is implied, but it certainly wouldn't seem so in translation. It's appalling to have such an otherwise respectable character say something so profoundly stupid. If we take it with that implication, though, it isn't as awful. Returning to our primary position, the outliers, those people who reject the consensus, society, or the ideas of Deimos, so to say, the angels of outer heaven, are those who follow the opposing meme. They were the MSF, the Diamond Dogs, and now philanthropy. We shouldn't forget that just because there are just mimetic lines outlying society, that does not mean that justice is a necessary quality of those lineages, or that every lineage outlying the exons of the hegemonic powers is just. The most obvious unjust lineage is that of Cypher, who gave birth mimetically to Paz, Skullface, and the Patriots. What makes the organism Cypher, and its so-called Patriots, so persistent and successful, and the organisms of outer heaven and their snake eaters so persistent yet unsuccessful in stopping Cypher? Snake eaters are warfighters, and they combine the best qualities of a soldier and an agent, like their progenitor. So-called Patriots are warlords, and they combine the qualities of a commander and a statesman, like their progenitor. For this reason, these so-called Patriots, the progeny of Cypher, are much more well-adapted and well-suited to the environment of geopolitics at the level of the state and society, like their progenitor, Cypher, or Zero. Solidus, though, is unique among both, and among his brothers, in the fact that he is not only a warfighter, but also a warlord, a soldier, an agent, a statesman, and a commander. He is indeed the greatest of the terrible children, because he has established a lineage. He may not believe or see it that way, and he may believe that he must kill his son eventually, and he may believe that his son is a failure, but it is certainly true that the lineage of Solidus Snake is the Snake Eater, codenamed Raiden. What is even more illuminating is knowing that Snake is not only like Big Boss, but also like the boss, because he himself is not necessarily a Snake Eater. And also, like his distant mother, he has fallen into the trap of the Patriots, even to such a degree that his successor becomes a Snake Eater by slaying him. Punished Venom Snake as well created a Snake Eater in Solid through the connection of Kazuhira, and it should not be lost on us that his capacity to create that Snake Eater comes from his succession to Vic Boss, where Solidus is utterly alone in his skill. He did this from nothing, establishing his own branch of this terrible family in solitude. Raiden, like Naked Snake, is indeed a new Jack, one who would surpass Solidus by memes alone. And in there we see the superiority of Solidus. And we can say that this is the S3 plan, but the S3 plan could only create a new Solid Snake, not a new Naked Snake. It is the achievement of Solidus alone to create a new big boss in Raiden, not the achievement of the Patriots to create a new Solid Snake. It is also in the Patriots' hubris to think that a new Solid Snake would actually serve them and not oppose them, like the actual Solid Snake does, if the program is actually successful in replicating Solid Snake fully. Raiden's skill, cunning, tenacity, his upbringing are all due to Solidus Snake, and this ingrained training, indoctrination, turning into a snake eater, a hero, is, as I see it, an achievement which does indeed put Solidus above his brothers, the one true successor to Big Boss. Not the Big Boss that Solid slew in Zanzibar land, but the Big Boss that Solid Snake slew in Outer Heaven. The true Big Boss, punished Venom Snake. The phantom pain of Raiden and Solidus is the loss of meaning. Now that his memes have passed on to an individual, the smallest historical unit, Solidus aims to pass his memes onto the largest unit of history, that is, general human thought in the current period of time, called the world. But even this is not a true meaning. This is not truly the function of life. It cannot fulfill him. It cannot give meaning back to him. On the other hand, it is the Patriots' goal, as per the philosopher's dream, the boss's dream, that the world be undivided and borderless, such that a meme, an ideal which is truly apart from others, that is not democratic, demos, but noble in nature, aristos, regardless of whether it is wrong or right, could never overpower others by its superior psychological ductility and divide the world of the philosophers in any manner. They speak about this, mentioning the seclusion of people within their own groups, but they do not mention the noble, the leader of those groups, the hero. Why is that? It is because ideas in themselves, being individual, such that no human idea is necessarily like every or any other idea, that is, that there are more than zero ideas at all, is in itself an affront to demos, the people that these so-called patriots believe they are or serve in the abstract. It is the fear of the patriots that this could happen at any moment as well, just like the moment it happened along the European axis, which was what caused the philosophers to bankroll the Second World War in the first place. The primal fear of demos, the zero, is aristos, the individual and noble one, with conviction, piety, and virtue. The Patriots' final goal, then, is the destruction of society in its human form. As they say,
a single person has the potential to ruin the world.
Therefore, they will eliminate the power of the individual, of the idea. And it is true, aristos can ruin the world, if ruin even has meaning to the Patriots. But as we have seen, and as they know, from Vic Boss to his punished Venom to Solid Snake, and now Raiden, it is also possible for Aristos to save the world. What does it mean to save the world? There is more to it than to free it from a historically momentary material evil. To save the world truly is to liberate it from sin. We both know who came to do that. Solid's mistake is to suppose that the mere existence of an idea, a personal meme, a convinced aristos, being sufficient to liberate the men from the iron fist of demos, would also be sufficient to liberate a man entirely. Only collaboration with the divine will of God can truly save, truly liberate us. The men most like God, the saints, are then the example of those who are actually liberated, and not free to do evil, but free from evil. Solid, and Solidus as well, were foolish to think that the end of men's goals, their debt, what they owed, was merely to the world. If only he could have seen the true function of man. We gauge leaders as liberators, not because of how free men are to do evil under their rule, but by how free men are from evil under their rule. This is the liberty of the Axis, which opposed the philosophers. Do you think that the despotism I spoke of was the mere mechanism of a ruler, or a rule, or the full result of it? It is certain that despotism is when men are subject to evil, when they cannot escape that evil, and thus the opposite of that is freedom. Freedom from evil. The liberty of the spirit, not the liberty of the material. The liberty of the next world, not the liberty of the world below. How ironic it is to think that all this time our heroes were fighting individual men, and we would perceive a despot to be such a thing. Yet in the final and most effective form of the philosopher's dream, we see at last that the worst of all despotism does not come from tyrants, but from the formless net, the so-called people, the patriots, demos. The ideal of the philosophers would be nothing less than a hellscape ruled by an antichrist principle. It would not just be a world with no borders, no culture, language, or even distinct people, but more so a world without ideas at all. You would think that because the patriots are ruling over a nation, that one could not argue they are loyal to demos because of their office as tyrants. Yet it is clear, because of their position,
we are formless. We are the very discipline and morality that Americans invoke so often. How can anyone hope to eliminate us? As long as this nation exists, so will we.
If anything, they are demos without flesh. They are zeros, the infinite demos, which purports itself to be master by its intrinsic qualities of the people and their will, which opposes the ones, aristoi, whether they are good or evil. It is a living status quo. The Patriot AIs, seeing the world in ones and zeros, claim any one, any of aristos, can ruin the world, so they will destroy any one, and as Cypher intended, reduce the world to zero. Where is this idea of information inundation from? Did audiences, being as uneducated as they were, really think that the idea of the world being drowned in information was novel? How laughable. Once again, we must bring up Jean Baudrillard, who described the exact effect of information inundation destroying meaning in his essay, The Implosion of Meaning in Media. Yes, it does come back to Baudrillard. At least with Kojima it does. The Patriots speak about the lack of meaning and the direction society is left with in the flood of information from the net. But Baudrillard talked about this in the 70s. In this work, he states, "We live in a world where there is more and more information and less meaning," and presents three hypotheses concerning the relation of information to meaning. The first is that information produces meaning, but cannot make up for the loss of meaning in every domain. That meaning is devoured faster than it can be re-injected, as he says. The second is that information does not actually have a relation to meaning. Quote, "Meaning is something else that in a sense comes after the fact." In this case, there would simply be no significant relation between the inflation of information and the deflation of meaning. This hypothesis is the one which I argue is the most true in reality. But that is irrelevant to the point we are making here, which is which hypothesis Kojima has written the Patriots to operate upon. And that is clearly the third hypothesis, that information is directly destructive of meaning. The loss of meaning is directly linked to the dissolving, dissuasive action of information. The Patriots do not operate by creating new information by themselves. They operate by controlling which information is made and available. A campaign of censorship, as Ryden says. Let us compare the paradoxes of modernity described by the Patriots with what is described by Baudrillard.
Continue to churn and accumulate in the sandbox of political correctness and value systems.
Everyone withdraws into their own small gated community, afraid of a larger forum. They stay inside their little ponds, leaking whatever truth suits them into the growing cesspool of society at large.
The different cardinal truths neither clash nor mesh. No one is invalidated, but nobody is right.
Not even natural selection can take place here. The world is being engulfed in truth.
And this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper.
We're trying to stop that from happening.
It's our responsibility as rulers. Just as in genetics, unnecessary information and memory must be filtered out to stimulate the evolution of the species.
You are concerned, you are the event, etc., etc. More and more information is invaded by this kind of phantom content, this homeopathic grafting, this awakening dream of communication. A circular arrangement through which one stages the desire of the audience, the amphitheater of communication which, as one knows, is never anything but the recycling in the negative of the traditional institution. The integrated circuit of the negative. Immense energies are deployed to hold this simulacrum at bay, to avoid the brutal dissimulation that would confront us in the face of the obvious reality of a radical loss of meaning. Baudrillard practically analyzes their objectives in this very essay. Are the mass media on the side of power in the manipulation of the masses, or are they on the side of the masses in the liquidation of meaning, in the violence perpetrated on meaning, and in fascination? It is certain that Kojima has read this essay. There is no doubt. But what is the significance of that? Why do I bring it up? The intron-exon dichotomy brought up by Solidus is, of course, the key to all this. If an exon is information with meaning, and the human, or some geopolitical unit of human beings, will necessarily operate as spliceosomes to determine what is an informational exon and an informational intron, then the total amount of information produced exceeds these spliceosomes' ability to regulate meaning for society, and society implodes into meaninglessness. The Patriots' fear is that, as Baudrillard hypothesizes, the sheer amount of information brought about by the internet has actually demonstrated an inverse correlation between the amount of information disseminated and the meaningfulness of information as a whole. Even with the maximum number of spliceosomes increased as everyone is on the internet, it is simply demonstrated that information itself has a corrosive effect on meaning. The different cardinal truths neither clash nor mesh. A sea of nothingness. This is the implosion that Baudrillard describes. Thus, the media are producers not of socialization, but of exactly the opposite, of the implosion of the social in the masses. And this is only the macroscopic extension of the implosion of meaning at the microscopic level of the sign. The Patriots are trying to prevent this implosion, or at least they think they are, in order to rejuvenate and regenerate society by censoring the flood of data coming from the net. Does Baudrillard have a solution to this? And does Kojima demonstrate anything similar? Or does he disagree? Their strategic resistance is the liberating claim of subjecthood, but this strategy is more reflective of the earlier phase of the system. And even if we are still confronted with it, it is no longer the strategic terrain. The current argument of the system is to maximize speech, the maximum production of meaning. Thus, the strategic resistance is that of the refusal of meaning and of the spoken word, or of the hyperconformist simulation of the very mechanisms of the system, which is a form of refusal and of non-reception. It is the strategy of the masses. It is equivalent to returning to the system its own logic by doubling it, to reflecting meaning, like a mirror, without absorbing it. This strategy, if one can still speak of strategy, prevails today. Baudrillard posits that the best way to fight back against the system's attempt to stabilize itself is by rejecting its ability to, by never absorbing meaning per its definition by the system. Kojima reasserts this in Solid Speech to Raiden.
The memories you have and the role you were assigned are burdens you had to carry. It doesn't matter if they were real or not. That's never the point. It's not whether you were right or wrong, but how much faith you were willing to have. That decides the future.
He is describing the refusal to absorb meaning. That is, distinguishing between real, not real, hyper-real, per the designs of the Patriots, but going further and stating that greater than meaning, or signification, is conviction, which Aristos has and Demos does not. To choose the wrong strategy is a serious matter. All the movements that only play on liberation, emancipation, on the resurrection of a subject of history, of the group, of the word based on consciousness raising, indeed a raising of the unconscious, of subjects and of the masses, do not see that they are going in the direction of the system, whose imperative today is precisely the overproduction and regeneration of meaning and of speech. Solid, who is speaking on the part of the author Kojima here, buys into this, saying,
There's no such thing in the world as absolute reality. Most of what they call real is actually fiction. What you think you see is only as real as your brain tells you it is.
The implosion of meaning in the big shell is left there, and thus it is no longer relevant or pertinent to Solid and Raiden whether they are operating on reality or hyperreality. Ironically, the assertion that there is no distinction between reality, unreality, and hyperreality can from a perspective be seen as asserting the original state of things, where there was only reality. If Raiden acts merely according to his convictions concerning stimuli and ambition, without regard to whether it is actually a real meme, like the ones given to him by Solidus, or a hyperreal meme, like the ones given to him by the Patriots, then he completely destroys the capacity for the Patriot AI to function as a spliceosome, because in this case they cannot determine what must be an intron or exon, because Raiden, an Aristos, by his conviction, declares it doesn't matter to him. Only his conviction matters. Kojima's solution...
Listen, don't obsess over words so much. Find the meaning behind the words, then decide.
...is in itself a return to signification, to go beyond the spoken word. And now Baudrillard's words. Thus, the strategic resistance is that of a refusal of meaning and a refusal of the word, or of the hyperconformist simulation of the very mechanisms of the system, which is a form of refusal and of non-reception. It is not an entire rejection of the possibility of meaning, only its origin in the system, in the machinations of the Patriots. They cannot reduce the world to zero if the mechanism by which they determine ones and zeros, Aristos and Demos, is rejected entirely and reflected back upon them.
Choose your own legacy. It's for you to decide.
However, this is an error on Solid's part, and I'll cover this later, because it denies the human unit as a spliceosome, being able to distinguish between actual meaning and actual meaninglessness, with additional qualities of real, unreal, hyperreality, and so on. It essentially denies the human's ability to spliceosomally determine anything at all. I'll cover that later. All this analysis really does, though, is establish the through line, the lineage of Kojima's ideas in Baudrillard's work. How ironic it would be if, in the very essay where I point out the gravity of conviction of the Aristos, I were not to have my own convictions concerning it. Simply, both Baudrillard and Kojima are wrong about meaning, truth, reality, hyperreality, and so on. Sure, some things are hyper-real. There are things which claim to represent something which in fact never existed. But that does not necessarily prove the third hypothesis. The hypothesis I assert is true is the second. Information and meaning have no necessary correlation. The third hypothesis has a fundamental problem in asserting that there was a premium, a singularity, or abundance of meaning before information even existed, or that perhaps information began from one single unit that held within it all possible meaning. Sure, that might be true in a roundabout angle-shooting way when it comes to physical information, which is matter, and the Big Bang, but Baudrillard is talking about information in a non-physical sense, so this hypothesis doesn't really hold. The idea which has a premium on meaning, the idea which has the most meaning, or from which all meaning is authored, from which all meaning arises, or from which all good comes. I certainly know what those qualities could be describing, but then the idea that the continued production of information could effectively destroy that meaning is impossible per the other qualities that singular most meaningful point would have. So the third hypothesis is contradicted. And the first? The first we see being contradicted every day in the AI slop phenomenon prevalent on the internet currently. Information is produced endlessly, but none of it has any meaning. And thus we see by contradiction that there is no necessary correlation or even inverse correlation between information and meaning. That is, information can be produced endlessly with all the meaning it has to, saying the most meaningful thing possible in infinite ways, or can be produced endlessly with no meaning whatsoever, saying nothing at all in infinite ways. Furthermore, we should also not associate Aristos inherently with good. We should certainly associate demos with evil, or temptation. That is, in its role as the world, it is of course ruled by the prince of the world. Yet, Aristos, being apart from the world in general, does not always mean one is free from worldliness in the sense that I have used it. One can look partially towards otherworldliness and yet not see the whole truth. It is only the straight and narrow path which leads us to heaven, the collaboration with God's providence. If there was one aristocrat, that is, the best of them all, it is the Supreme Being, the King of Kings. This King is the author of truth and meaning. When Solid divorces meaning from truth, and truth from reality, and so on continues dividing, he makes critical mistakes that, despite being on the path of Aristos, will not lead him up the straight and narrow to heaven. Information and meaning and truth are downstream from one another, but in practice, due to agency, they are not always in the same stream. There is information with and without meaning, meaning that is both false and true, but there is also information without meaning that is true. Information without meaning that is true, and meaningful truths that are not even conveyed in the form of information, like instincts. But not even all of our survival instincts will correlate to the final truth. Sometimes we must deny our survival in order to conform to truth, to conform to the will of God. In this we see that the saints are the greatest of men. It is by the second hypothesis we can see that the Patriots' objective is folly to begin with. The inundation of information actually has no effect on truth or meaning. How could it? This, by extension, invalidates Solid's position as well, that you can just pick anything and have faith in it, and fulfill your function. This is an equally ridiculous assertion. Kojima's assertion here goes all the way back to the delusion of liberalism we spoke about in my very first Metal Gear Solid appraisal. It is this moral agnosticism which destroys the soul. It is heretical and therefore injurious to your salvation to believe in it. There is good and evil. There is right and wrong. So it is shameful looking back on that delusion being asserted in this game. Does Solid not see that by asserting this he is only validating the convictions of his enemies, Liquid and Solidus? Why did he even oppose Liquid on this logic? It is ridiculous to assert such a thing. It is, if anything, capitulation to the problem, arguing that because there is so much hyperreality that it doesn't matter anymore. It does matter, and it is surrender to the Prince of the World to say otherwise. Who else would want for us to live in total ignorance of the moral law? Kojima, at this point in his career, had no capacity to be insightful beyond his inspirations, because we can see that his faux philosophical novelty is nothing but nonsense, at least in the dramatic realm. Even if the interplay of characters, of melodrama, and theatrics is meritorious, that is, the sensory element of the drama is quality, the intellectual element is sorely lacking. Ironically, meaning or truth. But I guess that doesn't really matter to Kojima, now does it? Did the Patriots win? No, they failed. Though they framed it to Raiden as though there was no option but to go along with their desires, it would be erroneous to say that it was their plan on the grounds that they told him so. It is their job to frame things according to their own perspective, and it would not be out of the realm of espionage to put forth such a bluff. Really, they've been mortally wounded. The control mechanism for their hegemony, Arsenal Gear, has been destroyed. GW, their strongest AI, has also been destroyed, or at least disabled for the time being. A new hero, a new Snake Eater, Raiden, has been created, who is viciously opposed to them, much like Solid Snake. Is the selection for societal sanity a success if its object, the prevention of an interruption in the status quo, is not achieved? Sure, it was achieved in the moment, but not in the long run, because it created people who would constantly attempt to interrupt the status quo. In a twist of fate, The connection between Solidus and Raiden that was so central in this execution of the S3 plan was what caused it to fail. The Shadow Moses event being considered a success was the error of the Patriots, because it meant that although the status quo had been maintained in the moment, it had been permanently shaken by the creation of a new Snake Eater. The connection between Solidus and Raiden that solidified the validity of the S3 plan, that is, that it was truly recreating the events of Shadow Moses, was what doomed it to failure, and yet also doomed it to be perceived as success by the Patriots. Solidus actually did become an Exxon through his progeny Raiden, a being fully outside, liberated from the systems of the Patriots. The Patriots understood only the letter of Shadow Moses, not the spirit, that is, victory against the despotism of Deimos. Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance is an awesome game, especially in its mechanics. Its fluid and precise control scheme put to use in stealth action on a space-time principle developed into an excellent gameplay foundation. The high encounter rate, that is, the high molarity level design, means the player is induced to use these mechanics throughout the game, and the high difficulty combined with the well-balanced formula of the fundamental gameplay purifies the final results in the skill expression of the player. However, most injurious is that second half of the game with slightly lower molarity stealth sections and lower overall difficulty in those sections as well, but for a slight moment in the Emma section. The developers compensated this with the best boss in the game, at least. On top of all this, the game is presented at a consistent 60 frames per second. All this appreciation comes out to a final rating in terms of net merit, a final score wherein we account all the deficiencies and accomplishments of the creative work in question, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is worthless garbage to be actively avoided, and a 10 is a perfect piece of art which must be understood, of 5.75 out of 10. The highest score for any Metal Gear Solid I've appraised so far. And there's only one left. Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots.